Hello, this is Paul Lucas with Jumpstart Nature Photography, and welcome back to the art of photography. We're covering that in this segment, composition. So in this segment, part 2, we're going to look at rules and tools. And as a short introduction and quick reminder, you can see my work at the URL listed on the presentation, paullucasphotography.com. And as always, I'd be happy to come and speak at your organization for no charge to give a Jumpstart presentation. I'm also available for hire for classes and workshops. If you'd like a copy of this presentation or any of the presentations on Jumpstart Nature Photography's website, please drop me an email. My email address is paul@jumpstartnaturephotography.com. If you have any questions about anything covered in the class or about photography, please drop me an email there. Also, I'd like to encourage you to participate in my no-charge online critique sessions. You can see the details here. And if you're interested in participating or have questions, send me an email at paul@jumpstartnaturephotography. Okay, so in this Jumpstart Nature Photography course, our main goals are covering the craft of photography using cameras and lenses to best realize our vision, composition, and the creative use of light. And we're in the composition section. So we're in part 2, composition rules and tools. So the very first rule of composition, very important, and I would encourage you to memorize this. There are no rules. Will Clay, a wonderful photographer based out of the landscape and nature photographer based out of the Chicago area, likes to say there are no rules. Second rule of composition is someone tells you about the rules of composition, whether it's a magazine, a book, or a professional, please refer back to rule number 1. So we'll talk about what we'll use in photography, but let's go on about things we might want to banish in thinking about or speaking or removing from our vocabulary when talking about photography. Of course, things like the word always. You always should do this or always follow that technique. Rule of thirds. If you look at the acronym of rule of thirds, it's ROT. There's only one correct exposure. And as I've mentioned, I kind of concerned to use that word correct exposure. It might be misconstrued. There's a good exposure. There's an exposure we're using to capture all the elements that we want to realize our vision. And that may result in overexposing some parts of or underexposing some parts of our photograph. If you're shooting into the sun at a sunset or sunrise, you're going to lose. You're not going to be able to capture the sun, right? It's too bright. So that part will be overexposed, but it's controlling that exposure to get the photograph we want to realize the vision and express ourselves. Words like never do this, or you must do that, blah, blah, blah. Okay, you get the idea, right? So always, and also, as I've mentioned in a presentation or two earlier, try to shoot with purpose and intent. You have a frame. Your sensor can capture a certain amount of data. Try to always compose your photograph so it fills the frame. Not saying that you're not going to crop at some other point. You may need to. There may just be the vantage point or the location you're in. You cannot exactly frame the photograph as your vision, as you see what you want as your final result. So you may have to crop. But as much as possible, try to capture an exposure that's going to work for your photograph, and trying to capture the composition of the photograph, of the vision you're trying to realize, with as much of the frame as possible. Shoot with intent. So I don't like to think of rules of composition, but I think of tools of composition. So just as a music composer has a variety of tools, whether it's a chord progression, whether it's a number of bars, but even then composers break those, right? They break those what people might call rules, but they're tools. Think of them as different ways, different elements I use in creating a composition to realize my vision of that scene. So always, you can use these tools as a starting point, and in an upcoming presentation, we'll talk about a few of these tools as ideas. Use them as a technical basis, a place to start, a beginning of inspiration, but don't feel like you're tied to a particular tool. Whatever you use creatively to capture that photograph and realize your vision, use it. So some things to ignore. Rules to ignore. Don't cut the composition in half. Sometimes it works out great to cut a composition in half. It depends on how all the elements sit in the photograph. You just have to be careful that when you have a photograph, so sometimes a mirror image, if you're taking a picture of a tree and you cut the image in half where the tree is on land and then the tree is reflecting in the water, depending on the rest of the elements, that makes a beautiful artistic statement. So it's really about the composition of how all the elements fit together. The potential in cutting a composition in half is it becomes very static, right? So just think about how you're going to do that and what it means to cut that composition in half. Abstracts are another rule to ignore. These are just a few thoughts to get us started down our composition path. Abstractions always need an anchor. Not necessarily. Not all photographs need to have an anchor. Sometimes an anchor is a place for the eye to rest, but not necessarily. You must shoot moving water. There's that must word at a fast shutter speed. There may be some controversy around this, right? Whether individuals think that you're not really capturing the way the image really is, that you've altered the image in some way. Again, it's an artistic statement. We're not doing documentary photography. We're not doing news photography. We're doing fine art and creative photography. So we can use all the different craft components of photography to realize and create that vision that we're trying to make with our photography. So that's just a quick few thoughts about rules and tools, a very short presentation, and some things to ignore. So just remember, there are no rules in composition. There are only tools. And who knows, you may come up with the next greatest idea or innovation in composition. So I look forward to seeing you in a future presentation, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.